I'm Anne, I'm married to Martin, and 40 years ago we adopted 2 boys. One first, followed 2 years later by the second.
Hi, my name is Doreen. I've been a foster carer for over 12 years. It really began quite a long time ago, probably over 20 years ago, when I looked after children with disability in my own home.
I'm Barbara. I have 2 adopted children. I have a daughter who is 6 and a son who is 4, and our daughter's been with us since she was 16 months old and our son since he was 13 months old.
My name's Amy and I'm adopted.
Hi, I'm Andy, and my wife and I have a natural child, a daughter, and for unexplained reasons we're unable to have other children. So that really opened us up to thinking about the possibility of opening our home to another child. So we fostered for a while, for a year, and then a child came to us for respite care, meant to come for 2 weeks, and 22 years later she's still with us because we adopted Karen. She's special needs.
Like most people, before and after we were married, we had hoped and planned and prayed for a family, but that didn't happen. So we began the whole circuit of infertility testing, which is pretty stressful. When it became obvious that we were not going to be able to conceive and have our own children, we then embarked on the next process for us, which was looking at the process of adoption.
We adopted her about 3 or 4 years after we had her as a foster child. And at the time we went through that whole process with the social workers of asking whether we were up for adopting a child who would always need care. But by that time she'd become so much part of our family that the thought of actually losing her would have been a bigger bereavement.
I became really keen to learn about foster care, and through that I then moved on to be a foster carer full-time, just doing respite foster care with Bernardos.
Ultimately, what motivated us to adopt was infertility. Having tried for a couple of years to conceive, we had basic tests which told us that we would never have a biological child, and for us the answer was easy, that we would adopt.
My mum was an alcoholic, my dad was anonymous, and I was the last of 6 children. So I was in and out of care, probably 6 or 7 homes in the space of 2 years, and social work just realised my mum wasn't capable of caring for such a young child. So there was a process of several homes and trying to place me and it not working out. Eventually I was adopted by a Christian couple in Lenzie who took on the challenge of raising a fairly difficult child. So they got me when I was 3.5 going on 4, I think. Yeah.
So we felt very positive about adoption because it's biblical, and if we'd known about the process we'd have gone into it maybe a little bit more cautiously, but it was a very easy decision for us to make that we would adopt.
Although it's just respite that I do, which involves the children coming for weekends or longer periods of time, it took about over 6 months for the approval to go through as a foster carer.
You're waiting for phone calls and waiting for prep groups, waiting for assessments, waiting for panels, and then waiting to be matched with a child.
You've got to give your whole life story really. Just talk a lot about yourself, your past. There's a lot obviously checks done through the authorities, it's all got to be done. You've got to look at family and your home situation, and there is training involved as well before you even get to look after any of the children.
As Christians, Martin and I's primary concern really was to know what God had for us in our lives, and we had to be open to the possibility that that was going to be childlessness. So we decided that we would open a door if we could and see what God had for us, and we applied for an adoption society that was really pretty particular, very professional, and we knew would give us a thorough testing. that was really because we had to be sure that this was part of God's plan for our lives. And going through that process was not easy. It's very difficult to have other people decide whether you're going to be an appropriate or a competent parent.
But it does take quite a long time, and it is quite invasive, I would say, but for me, because it was something I really wanted to do, it was worth it, yeah. And I think it is important too, because children that you're going to be looking after are children that have come from very vulnerable and difficult backgrounds, so for that reason alone, I think it's only right that they know exactly who you are and what you are. So.
The length of the process does vary depending where you live. For us, it was 2 years almost to the day. From the day that we first phoned social work to the day that we met our daughter, and that was quite quick compared to a lot of people. We had a month, with 7 months of waiting after we were approved until we were matched with our daughter. So that was probably the hardest point of the process, just waiting every day for the phone to ring.
We were really delighted when at the end of that process we were told we were going to be accepted, and we had then to wait for the child that they would match to us. That came in the form of a 6-week-old little boy with red hair, which was amazing because Martin's mother was a redhead. I thought we'd avoided that, but we hadn't. 2 years later, that was followed by a 4-week-old premature baby weighing 5 pounds 7 ounces, also a boy. And at that point, I felt my family had arrived, and there was a tremendous sense of completion and privilege and joy. And parenting proved to be difficult, challenging, but fantastically rewarding.
I'd say the highlight of the process is certainly meeting your child for the first time. When you walk into the foster carer's house and you see your daughter for the first time and hold them in your arms, and I remember saying to my daughter, "Hello, I'm your mummy and this is your daddy." And it's such a special moment, and that's definitely the highlight. It's when you forget about everything that's gone before and you know that this is it, you've managed it, you're a mum.
I was old enough to be aware of what was happening, so 3.5, 4, you know you're moving house in a different family. So what social work recommended was that my parents just, kind of every day or every week just reiterated my story and where I'd come from. And that worked really well for me, because now, as people would say, "Oh, I came home from the hospital," I'm like, "Oh, I came home from foster care," and it's a totally natural part of my story, and I tell it the same way I would tell coming home from the hospital story. So that has worked really well. I know people who've found out, years on that they're adopted, and it's probably really destroyed them to find out they've been living in a kind of lie. And so the way that social work recommended and the way my parents did that was really helpful, I think, for me to be accepting of where I came from.
We really would have struggled to look after Karen without the help of the church family. Constantly, the church family have been a major support to us. So, for example, at the moment, even now, Karen, although she's 23, goes into Sunday club at church, and there's a rota that the church runs for that. Previous minister and his wife would meet us on a Sunday morning and say, "You're looking tired, we'll take her for the rest of the day." There have been people throughout Scotland who have met her, a couple of older women in fact, who prayed for her and for us every single day, just because they saw the kind of, with these additional needs it adds extra pressure, or pressure on anybody. I think the other interesting thing that our minister said, because she would be quite disruptive sometimes within a service. Her learning difficulties would mean she'd be quite inappropriate socially. She would just shout out or scream or whatever. And I apologised to our minister once for that, and he said, "What are you talking about? She's part of the church." And he went on to say, "I just need to be more entertaining in what I'm doing." And that was exactly the kind of setting that you want to be in, because you feel embarrassed by that kind of thing, but somebody saying to you, "No, that she's part of the community here." And actually her behaviour within the church has improved enormously, and she loves going, partly because she's valued there. People don't just speak to us, they speak to her.
When both of our children were baptised, we sang the song Father God I Wonder, and in that is the lines, now I am your child, I am adopted in your family, and I can never be alone because Father God you're there beside me. And I think that is a good reminder that we are all adopted, and it's not something that to be afraid of, it's something to be celebrated. And that's certainly what we do with our children, is we celebrate the fact that they're adopted, and well, we thank God for it every day that they are.
There was a time where we did come across a really difficult situation. We looked after two boys who had exceedingly challenging behaviour, and they were with us during the summer for quite a long spell of time. And they were wee boys who they would steal quite readily, so they would be taking lots of things up to their room. And I have got two children of my own. They are grown up now. This was a few years ago, and my daughter was a bit younger, so they would go into a room and they would steal things, and they were quite violent, quite physical as well. So it was quite a huge challenge to us at that time, just really looking after the boys at that level. But in an amazing way, as a Christian, I just felt they were where they were meant to be at that point, and we were able to speak to the boys and to help them to overcome some of their behaviours.
I mean, it's been tough. Of course, it's been tough because for many years, Karen didn't sleep through the night at a time when you thought you were beyond that, and it was still happening. In fact, I mean, basically our whole lives have been, well, especially my wife's professional life. She was a teacher. She's had to give that up. Does she resent that? No, because this is what she's called to do. I'm not saying it hasn't been easy all the time. I'm sure there are times when she must reflect and think it'd be nice to be a teacher, but this is what God has asked us to do, and that's what we're committed to. And but as I say, we couldn't have done it without the help of other Christians.
I think the hardest point for me was probably about a year after our son came home. It took us a year and a half before we legally went to court to adopt him, because social workers knew he was in a safe place, so things slowed down a little bit. That was the hardest time because I wasn't legally his mum, and I was going to meetings and I was being referred to as his carer, and his birth mum was being called his mum. And that for me was a very hard time, and it was probably the lowest point that I've had in the whole process. The other lowest point for me would certainly be coming to terms with infertility, and that's something that we really had to go through and grieve for the good 2 years we were going through the process.
I think the one thing that has been crucial in all of it was that we were sure that our marriage was in God's will. So infertility happened to both of us, although I was the person who was not able to conceive. And so in our marriage, that did not create a tension or a problem or any sense of blame. And I think the big thing that I learned in parenting was that Jesus really has to come first. When you long for a child, that can actually become an obsession. It can become an idol. And when you parent a child, I discovered, the child can also become an idol. And that is so wrong and so frustrating and so debilitating as a parent, if you're a Christian, because the priority has always to be what Jesus said in Mark 12, that we have to love God first, we have to love Him first, and when we get that right, then the other priorities fall into place. And I had to to learn and relearn that lesson right through the process of parenting, when issues with my children, whether it was health or some other difficulty, became a kind of overwhelming anxiety or pressure. And so I had to just give that to God and say what I believe, that He loves my children even more than I do, and so I have to trust Him with them, and that keeps my relationship with Jesus right, and it also keeps my relationship with my children right.
As a Christian, that's really what motivates me, to have to be perfectly honest. I do love children, I have to say that, as Jesus loved the children, and He wasn't a person who cast them aside. He wanted them to come to Him, because He said the kingdom of Heaven belongs to them as well, and I really do believe that. And just to be able to show Jesus' love to them, it's just, again, a privilege. It's great. It's been part of our church that we're able to take them to Sunday school. Two wee boys, I say, who have just got so many difficulties, and but I said we were going to go to Sunday school, and of course I think God's last word was school. They do associations with school, because school's not their favourite place. But in such an amazing way, when he came out, all they talked about was God's love for them, and how that the next time they came to visit, would they definitely be able to go back to Sunday school again.
I became a Christian when I was 12 at an SU camp, and I kind of decided either it was all true and I had to be all in, or it wasn't true and I had to be all out. So thankfully I chose to be all in, and decided that God was for real, and I made that choice. Didn't make my life dramatically easier for a while, because I then had to wrestle with this issue of where was God in my early years, and you know, did He know I was coming? Was I a mistake? But it really helped me, knowing things from the Bible about the fact that God knew you before you were born. So for me, you know, God knew I was coming, and God had planned for me to be in another family, and that's part of why I love Him, I guess. And you know, my favourite Bible character, if you can have one, is Moses, first registered foster child ever in the Bible, and he, you know, he's a great inspiration for children who are struggling with faith and their background, because he had to go through the same, living with a family that potentially wanted to kill him. Kind of difficult, but you know, finding his faith in God and how to negotiate being part of two families.
Our two children are full siblings, though we adopted them a year apart, and we've met their birth parents, and we have a photograph of myself and my husband and the birth parents, and they look at that, well, almost daily. We keep it just on a shelf and they look at it. They know their story, they're very much aware of it, and I'm sure the harder times are still to come, but at the moment it's just talking about it being such a positive thing and a good thing, and how the birth parents weren't able to look after little babies. They had some problems, but now the children have got a forever mummy and daddy, and that we'll always be there for them.
Probably once I hit my teenage years, and you know, every teenager goes through this identity crisis and who am I, and it's all dramatic and hormonal, and you try going through that when you literally don't know who you are. So, you know, my mum passed away when I was 4 or 5, and my dad, you know, there was no name on the birth certificate, and I didn't keep in contact with any of my siblings, so I was having your usual teenage drama crisis of, oh, who am I, but really genuinely struggling with who actually am I, and in a very teenage way having that nature-nurture debate for years with myself, and just wondering, you know, am I going to turn out like the rest of my family because that's in my blood and in my nature, or because I've been given this new life and a good upbringing, am I going to turn out all right? And in the middle of that, being a Christian, I'm like, did God know I was coming? Did He have to work a way out to fit me into His plans? Was I surprised to Him as I was to my parents? And all of that kind of stuff, whether you remember what happened in the early years or not, is difficult.
I think some of the issues are around what you can do as parents who would expect in normal circumstances to have greater freedom as your children grow up. And in a case of adopting someone who needs basically 24-hour care, you don't have the freedoms that others have. That can be a pressure, because people forget that and they invite you to things or expect you to be free for things. This has especially been a pressure of my wife, when with the nature of the needs that our daughter has, you don't have the freedom that other families have of a similar age. And that's a pressure, just thinking that through and recognising that what God has called you to, and that is part of your ministry in life.
I think I've had friends who've considered adopting who maybe have this notion that it's going to be lovely, they're going to rescue this child and live in this happy ever after family, and I guess this notion that because you've rescued a child from a worse life that they're going to be forever grateful and loving. And that's probably not the case. I think parents need to really be prepared for issues that might come out much, much later, unexpectedly, or difficulties in the relationship, because if a child has been damaged in some way, they're not going to trust you just because you rescued them. And so parents really have to be prepared to the fact their relationship might not be as loving and easy and romantic as they hope. I hope it is, I do, but to be prepared for that and to absolutely always be honest about where a child has come from. I really think covering up details is the worst thing you can do. A child has to kind of negotiate the fact that they have two families and two identities, and just to allow them to do that, it's hard as parents. You want to say you're part of our family now and to be very tight in that, but they have to accept to an extent that a child will know that they've come from somewhere else, and to be okay with that if they are.
We've probably got about 11 children at the moment who come at different times. We take up to 3 children at a time. Not always from sibling groups, sometimes they're from 2 different families. It's just a wonderful time that we have, to just look after them, to care for them, to show them a bit of love, to do fun things with them.
The other issue is probably the security in relationships, and just this small undermining feeling that people are going to leave or that relationships aren't permanent. And although I've had people in my life who've been so trustworthy and secure, there's just this undercurrent of worry that people are still going to leave, or you're going to be helpless when you need support. And that's always there, and it doesn't go away, but you learn to live with it.
Our boys knew from the very start that they were adopted. It was just part of who they were, and in the goodness of God, they each had other adopted children in their school classes, which was an amazing provision. So they didn't think they were that different. They don't look like us physically, but they do have our mannerisms. They sadly have things in their personalities that reflect us. The thing that we had to do was to learn our children, because there's no genetic input. You don't recognise any of your own character traits in your children when they're adopted, and you really have to let them just be themselves, be the children and the adults that God has made them to be. And that's an amazing process. And looking back now, because of course my children are grown, 40 and 38, they are lovely Christian men, they are themselves, and I really never think of them as being adopted. They are our children, we love them to bits, we take great pride in them, and the whole process has been a wonderful privilege for us. Would we go through it again? Absolutely, yes.
One phrase that I've always had in my mind is that we don't know what the future holds, but we know who holds the future. And that's something I think we have to hold on to in adoption, because the adoption process, it takes you apart and it takes you to pieces and it can shatter you. But fortunately we know the Creator who's got the blueprint, and He can put us back together again, and that's something that takes time, but it's all worth it in the end. It really truly is. You do forget all the bad bits.
They do speak to you, quite often in the car is the time when they like to chat, and they do talk a lot. They talk a lot about the past and how they saw it, and it's good to be able to just talk. It's good that they're able to have that relationship with you, that they are able to talk to you, which I think is just a privilege, really. Yeah.